June 11th, 1962, 11:37 p.m., Cell Block B, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Clarence Carnes pressed a folded piece of paper into Bumpy Johnson's hand during mail call. On the outside, it looked like a torn piece from a magazine. On the inside, written in tiny letters barely visible to the naked eye, were 3 words: Tonight, Pier 13. Bumpy read it once, then ate the paper. That night, 3 men, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, would attempt what every expert said was impossible: escape from Alcatraz, the most secure prison in America. The prison surrounded by freezing water. The prison where the currents alone killed most men before they could swim 100 yards. But here's the secret that the FBI spent decades trying to prove and could never confirm. Bumpy Johnson, prisoner number 1117AZ, was the mastermind behind the entire operation, and he pulled it off without ever leaving his cell. To understand how Bumpy Johnson orchestrated the greatest prison escape in American history, you need to understand something crucial. Bumpy wasn't like other prisoners. When he arrived at Alcatraz in 1952, sentenced to 15 years for drug conspiracy, the guards expected another gangster who'd try to fight his way through his sentence. What they got was a man who played chess. Not just on the board, but with every person, every system, every rule in that prison. Bumpy spent his days in the prison library. He read philosophy, poetry, history. He studied the guards' routines. He learned the tidal patterns of San Francisco Bay. He memorized the prison's infrastructure like other men memorized baseball stats. But most importantly, Bumpy understood something fundamental about Alcatraz. The prison wasn't designed to keep men from escaping. It was designed to make them believe escape was impossible. And once you shattered that belief, anything was possible. Frank Morris was different from other inmates. He was smart. IQ of 133. He'd escaped from multiple prisons before. When the feds sent him to Alcatraz in January 1960, they thought they'd finally contained him. They were wrong, because in March 1962, Frank Morris approached Bumpy Johnson with a question that would change history. You know these waters better than anyone in here. If a man wanted to get off this rock, how would he do it? Bumpy looked up from his chess game. He'd been waiting for someone to ask that question for almost 10 years. You got the men? Bumpy asked quietly. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, farm boys, strong swimmers. You got the plan? Morris nodded. He'd been working on it for months. Ventilation shafts, dummy heads made of soap and hair, a raft made from stolen raincoats. Then you're halfway there, Bumpy said, but getting off the island is the easy part. It's what happens after that kills you. Morris leaned in closer. The current, Bumpy explained. Most men who try to swim from Alcatraz aim for San Francisco. That's why they drown. The current pulls you toward the Golden Gate. You don't fight the current. You use it. Morris was listening intently now. You leave at night, high tide. Let the current carry you north toward Angel Island, but you don't go to Angel Island. You aim for Horseshoe Bay, just before the island. There's a cove. The current creates a pocket of still water there between 11:45 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. How do you know this? Bumpy smiled. I've been watching the water for 10 years, every night. Same window, same time. I know these currents better than the Coast Guard. Morris was impressed. And if we make it to the cove? That's where the real problem starts, Bumpy said. You'll be exhausted, freezing, hypothermic. You need a boat. You need dry clothes. You need someone waiting. Who's going to be waiting for 3 escaped convicts from Alcatraz? Bumpy's smile widened. Me. Here's what the FBI never fully understood. Bumpy Johnson never stopped running Harlem, even from inside Alcatraz. Through letters, through visitors, through coded messages smuggled in magazines and legal documents, Bumpy maintained contact with his organization back in New York. His wife, Mamie, visited once a month. So did his lawyers. So did business associates who claimed to be distant relatives. Each visit was an opportunity to send instructions, and Bumpy's instructions for this operation were very specific. I need a man in San Francisco, someone loyal, someone who can keep his mouth shut, someone who can navigate a boat in the dark. That man was Jerome Turner, the same parking attendant who'd warned Bumpy about the Italian mob approaching Big Sam 5 years earlier. The same man Bumpy had paid $500 to disappear. Bumpy had set Jerome up with a new life in San Francisco. New name, new job as a fisherman, new identity. Jerome owed Bumpy everything, and now Bumpy was calling in that debt. Through a series of coded letters, Bumpy explained the plan. June 11th, 1962, 11:45 p.m., Pier 13, Hunters Point District. Small fishing boat, no lights, no engine running. Pick up 3 men from the water, drive them to Oakland, give them $1,000 cash, dry clothes, and bus tickets to Mexico. Never speak of it again. Jerome's response came 2 weeks later, hidden in a postcard that supposedly came from Mamie. The fishing has been excellent this season. Translation: message received. I'll be there. What made the Alcatraz escape legendary wasn't just the planning, it was the timing. Everything had to happen perfectly within a 45-minute window. Morris and the Anglin brothers had to break out of their cells, 9:30 p.m., navigate through ventilation ducts, 9:30 to 10 p.m., reach the roof, 10 to 10:30 p.m., descend to the shore, 10:30 to 11 p.m., inflate their raft made from stolen raincoats, 11 to 11:30 p.m., launch into the water during high tide, 11:30 to 11:45 p.m., let the current carry them to Horseshoe Bay Cove, 11:45 p.m. to 12:15 a.m., meet Jerome's boat at Pier 13, 12:30 a.m. If any part of this plan failed, if a guard noticed the dummy heads, if the raft didn't inflate properly, if the current shifted, if Jerome got cold feet, they were all dead or back in prison. But Bumpy had calculated everything. He knew the guard shift changes. He knew the lighthouse rotation patterns. He knew the fog schedule based on San Francisco weather patterns. He knew exactly how long it would take 3 men to paddle from Alcatraz to Horseshoe Bay in a makeshift raft. And on June 11th, 1962, everything went exactly as Bumpy predicted. 11:47 p.m. Alcatraz Island. Guards made their rounds. Flashlights swept across cell bars. Everything appeared normal. In cells 138, 140, and 142, 3 papier-mâché heads with real human hair rested on pillows, illuminated by dim moonlight. They looked just real enough to fool a guard making a routine check. But the men who were supposed to be sleeping in those beds were gone. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin were already in the water, paddling furiously in their homemade raft, heading north just as Bumpy had instructed. Meanwhile, in cell 117, Bumpy Johnson sat awake, watching the clock on the wall outside his cell. 11:50 p.m. They should be in the water now. 12:05 a.m. They should be approaching Horseshoe Bay. 12:15 a.m. They should be climbing into Jerome's boat. Bumpy couldn't see any of this. He couldn't know for sure if it had worked. But at 12:30 a.m. he allowed himself a small smile, because he knew the Coast Guard wouldn't even discover they were missing until morning head count at 7 a.m. By then, Morris and the Anglins would be 8 hours gone. The next morning, when guards discovered the elaborate dummy heads and the empty cells, Alcatraz erupted in chaos. FBI agents swarmed the island. The Coast Guard launched a massive search. Helicopters scanned the bay. Divers searched the waters. They found pieces of the raft. They found a paddle. They found a life jacket floating near Angel Island. But they never found bodies. The official FBI conclusion: Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in San Francisco Bay. Their bodies were swept out to sea by the powerful currents. Case closed. But some people didn't believe it. Clarence Carnes, one of Bumpy's closest friends in Alcatraz, later told investigators something interesting. A few months after the escape, he received a postcard. It had no return address, just 2 words: "Gone fishing." It was a code phrase, the same phrase Bumpy used to signal successful operations back in Harlem. Carnes told an episode of Unsolved Mysteries that he believed the 3 men had survived, and that Bumpy Johnson had arranged for a boat to pick them up at Pier 13 in San Francisco's Hunters Point district. The FBI dismissed this claim, but they couldn't disprove it either. March 21st, 1963. Bumpy Johnson walked out of Alcatraz a free man, released on parole after serving 11 years. The entire neighborhood of Harlem threw him a parade. Thousands lined the streets. Jazz bands played. People cheered. It was the return of a king. But 3 days after his release, Bumpy did something strange. He took a trip to Sausalito, California, a small fishing village just north of San Francisco. He met with a man at a dockside cafe. The meeting lasted 10 minutes. The 2 men shook hands. The man handed Bumpy a sealed envelope. When Bumpy opened it later, inside was a photograph. 3 men, deeply tanned, standing on a beach somewhere tropical. They weren't looking at the camera. Their faces were slightly blurred, as if the photo had been taken from a distance. But Bumpy recognized them: Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin. On the back of the photo, written in pen: "Fishing's great down here, thanks for the tip." Bumpy burned the photograph that night. The FBI spent years investigating the Alcatraz escape. They interviewed hundreds of prisoners. They tracked down every known associate of Morris and the Anglins. But they never seriously investigated Bumpy Johnson's role. Why? Because Bumpy was a master of plausible deniability. There were no letters explicitly discussing an escape plan. There were no recorded phone calls. There was no money trail. There were no witnesses who could directly connect Bumpy to the operation. Everything was coded. Everything was indirect. Everything was orchestrated through intermediaries who didn't know the full picture. Jerome Turner, the fisherman who allegedly picked up the escapees, died in 1971 in a boating accident. He never spoke about that night. Clarence Carnes, who claimed Bumpy helped with the escape, died in prison in 1988. His claims were dismissed as prison gossip. Mamie Johnson, Bumpy's wife, took her secrets to the grave in 2009. And Bumpy himself? He died in 1968, 6 years after the escape, of a heart attack while eating breakfast at Wells Restaurant in Harlem. He never spoke publicly about Alcatraz, but those who knew him well say that whenever someone mentioned the famous 1962 escape, Bumpy would smile just slightly and say, "Those boys were smart, smarter than the FBI gave them credit for." In 2013, the FBI received a letter claiming to be from John Anglin, one of the escaped prisoners. The letter, allegedly written in 2013 when Anglin would have been 83 years old, claimed that all 3 men had survived, but that Morris and Clarence Anglin had since died. The handwriting was analyzed but never conclusively verified. In 2015, a photo surfaced allegedly showing the Anglin brothers in Brazil in 1975. Facial recognition experts said there was a strong possibility it was them. The FBI officially keeps the case open. But here's what nobody talks about. If Morris and the Anglins did survive, they would have needed 3 things: expert knowledge of San Francisco Bay currents, a boat waiting at a specific location at a specific time, money and resources to disappear completely. Bumpy Johnson could provide all three. And there's one more piece of evidence that conspiracy theorists love. Bumpy was released from Alcatraz on parole in March 1963, just 9 months after the escape. For a man sentenced to 15 years who'd only served 11, that's unusually early parole. Some believe Bumpy made a deal. He'd keep quiet about what he knew regarding prison security vulnerabilities in exchange for early release. Others believe the government simply wanted him gone before he could orchestrate any more impossible escapes. Whether or not Bumpy Johnson actually orchestrated the Alcatraz escape doesn't really matter anymore. What matters is this: Bumpy proved something that terrified the federal government. Even from inside America's most secure prison, a smart man with the right connections could still pull strings on the outside world. He proved that walls and bars and freezing water couldn't contain a strategic mind. He proved that the most dangerous weapon wasn't a gun or a knife. It was intelligence, planning, patience, and a network of people who owed you their loyalty. After the 1962 escape, Alcatraz's reputation was shattered. If 3 men could walk out in the middle of the night with dummy heads and a homemade raft, what did that say about maximum security? Less than a year later, in March 1963, the federal government announced that Alcatraz would be shut down permanently. Too expensive to maintain, they said. Too outdated, they said. But insiders knew the truth. The island prison that was supposed to be escape-proof had been beaten, and whether he orchestrated it or not, Bumpy Johnson had become the legend who proved it could be done. Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survive? The FBI says no, but Clarence Carnes said yes. A mysterious photo from Brazil says maybe. And Bumpy Johnson, he took the answer to his grave. What we do know is this: no bodies were ever found, no confirmed remains ever washed ashore, and 3 men who were supposed to drown in San Francisco Bay that night in 1962 simply vanished into history, just like Bumpy taught them. Because in the underworld, the greatest power isn't making people disappear. It's making them reappear exactly where you want them. And if Bumpy Johnson could swap a gun in Big Sam's apartment without him noticing, if he could let a traitor pull a trigger and turn it into a lesson, if he could control Harlem from a prison cell 3,000 miles away, then arranging for 3 men to vanish from Alcatraz, that was just another Tuesday for the Godfather of Harlem. And Bumpy Johnson, he turned Alcatraz into his own personal chessboard.